Well, we're joined now by Unheard Newsroom editor James Billow for our daily deep dive. James, the Nord Stream pipeline is at the center of the conflict in Eastern Europe and has been at the center actually for a number of years. People might remember conversations about Nord Stream pipelines predating Putin's invasion of Ukraine to begin with. And now developments warrant this deep dive. Tell us what we learned about the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, another very consequential moment in this conflict just in the last couple of days.
Deep dive is a particularly fitting description of this segment today. We had Germany in the last 2 days issue an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian national over the 2022 attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines. The suspect is a Ukrainian diving instructor named only as Vladimir Z for privacy reasons. This person is believed to have left Poland. His whereabouts is currently unknown. But who is behind the Nord Stream attacks has been this long-running mystery for the past 2 years. And so just to give you a quick overview, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 was a not yet operational pipeline, but they were major conduits from the Baltic Sea of Russian gas into Europe. And that was particularly the case for Germany. Germany used this as a valuable source of gas. Their use was controversial because the EU was reliant on Russian energy, and it was feared that it would become some kind of economic leverage for Putin. So this attack occurred on September 2022, and blame was cast immediately in two major directions. On the one side, we had the neoconservatives, the liberal internationalists, or as some people like to call them, the NATO shills, and they all said it was clearly Russia. So let me just run you through a few of these headlines just to give you a flavor. Politico said, everything pointing to Russia. Washington Post editorial board, the author of this strike against Europe's stability and security was Russia. An Atlantic Council writer, everything is pointing to Russia being behind this. David Goldwyn, a State Department official under Obama, said it was unequivocal that Russia was behind this attack. And then even a year later, we had countries like Germany's defense minister suggesting that it was some kind of Russian false flag to smear Ukraine. The idea that Russia would be behind the destruction of its own pipeline and essentially kneecapping its own bit of leverage over the continent of Europe, it never really made that much sense.
Yes, no, I think that's a point that's worth pausing on, because actually the question of sanctions, Biden's decisions as it related to sanctions on the pipeline, a lot of people will point back to that and say this is where Putin decided that it made sense to actually invade Ukraine, that was kind of at the center of his decision making in terms of the timing. You know, was he always going to do it? Open question. But under Joe Biden, did he do it because of Nord Stream sanctions and Biden's decision there? Hugely important question. So then the motive, it's the exact same question there. And it seems like what was generated, I mean, those headlines you ran down, again, just worth internalizing. Washington Post editorial board, Politico, U.S. Energy Secretary. These were, I mean, you have the State Department official under Obama saying, quote, unequivocal, using the word unequivocal, which gave permission to all of these news outlets to have essentially a fake news cycle. And I hate using that term, but this is insane. Like in the hours after the attack, you were called a conspiracy theorist if you suggested some force other than Russia. If you suggested we didn't know whether Russia was behind it, you were smeared as a conspiracy theorist. And just revisiting those headlines, James, I think is a worthy exercise, because I don't know that a lot of, typical Americans have spent the last couple of years musing over who actually attacked the Nord Stream pipeline. But it's another notch in the distrust scoreboard for media, and this is a significant one.
Right, and the thing to emphasize about that is that this was very much a bipartisan reaction. Had neoconservatives all the way down to Lindsey Graham, of course, we spoke about him in the last item, Marco Rubio, all the way through to Obama state officials. So it really became a bipartisan belief that Russia must have been behind this. But on the other side, we had another camp that was let's say the leftists, the realists, those who are a little bit more skeptical about America. And they were certain, in much the same way that these other people were certain that Russia was behind it, they were certain America was behind it. And in fairness, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing in their favor. So for instance, they picked up on these remarks from Joe Biden.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine. again, then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
Or this from State Department official Victoria Nuland.
If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
So both these comments alluding to the fact that Nord Stream 2 would come to an end, weren't really specific about how that would be the case, and that's why it was left to all this interpretation. But then the smoking gun for this camp really came with the tweet from Radoslaw Sikorski, former Poland foreign minister, who tweeted, "Thank you, USA," which was deleted shortly after the explosion.
Husband, of course, of Anne Applebaum, who's a big name in sort of establishment foreign policy circles.
So you can see there was a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing in Americans' favor, and it was fueled even more so by a big Seymour Hersh story, who claimed that the US orchestrated the attack and that Biden had colluded with the Norwegian Navy.
And he was, remind me, Hersh was suggesting the CIA had colluded with the Norwegian Navy.
CIA, he said, was instrumental in this collusion. In the succeeding weeks about this Seymour Hersh story, it went all the way up to the White House, who were forced to deny it. And we had researchers, open source researchers, picking holes in several of the claims made by Hersh. But the fundamental issue with that story was that it relied on a single anonymous source. So whether that was enough for people to ride on, it seemed unlikely, but others insisted that it still must have been America. We had David Sachs here tweeting the following, and then we had another Sachs, Jeffrey, who was actually speaking to Unheard's Freddie Sayers about why America must have been the guilty party.
Frankly, it's been obvious from the start. This was not an easy operation to carry out. It's the kind of operation that the CIA and other covert parts of the U.S. government do carry out rather routinely, by the way. They blow up lots of infrastructure over time, try to keep it hidden. But it was hard to keep this one hidden because the United States was basically the only country with the motive, the means, and rather remarkably, having announced beforehand that the intention was to end Nord Stream if Russia invaded Ukraine.
So for some time, this mystery continued, but signs started pointing to a third party. Now, it wasn't a lone rogue fisherman or something like that. It was actually Ukraine. So although people like Jeffrey Sachs dismissed Ukraine because they said that the country didn't have the means or the resources or even the motive to conduct such an operation, it was entertained by someone else. And this person has come away from this explosion smelling like roses. So here is former presidential advisor Fiona Hill speaking with Freddie again in February 2023. Firstly, here she is explaining why she didn't think it was the US.
If the United States had done that by now, given the way that the United States system works, somebody would have laid claim to this. I mean, you can think about many other episodes in which it's got out. The United States can be a pretty leaky sieve in terms of information.
And here she is explaining why it could have been Ukraine.
Some of my colleagues who have been looking at this think Ukraine could have done it. And, it's not implausible because, they already, managed to have a pretty significant strike on the Kerch Bridge, for example. But I haven't seen any evidence.
And so funnily enough, a month after that interview took place, more evidence seemed to support her claim. And it came out that US officials believed that a pro-Ukraine group was behind the attacks. And now, over a year on from that report, Germany has issued an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian international. However, the story is still unfolding. So yesterday, we had a Wall Street Journal piece detailing exactly how the mission was conducted. The source of controversy was, okay, Ukraine might have been involved, but it certainly didn't go all the way up to Zelensky. Now, according to this Wall Street Journal report, Zelensky was informed and he did give his initial approval. So the Ukrainian operation, it cost around $300,000. It involved a 6-member crew that involved trained civilian divers. Zelensky initially approved the plan, and now here we return to the CIA. He approved it, but when the CIA later learned of the operation, they had demanded or asked President Zelensky to pull the plug, and he subsequently did that. So actually, the CIA did play a role, but it seemed to play the opposite role, if these reports are to be believed, than what the realists and leftists thought.
So, James, I'm looking at this Wall Street Journal story right now, and we're talking about divers renting a yacht, some CIA awareness. It bears an eerie resemblance to the Seymour Hersh story, does it not? I mean, when I'm looking at just the sort of bones of what the Wall Street Journal is reporting now, I mean, Hirsch seems to be putting more of the, if my memory is serving me correctly, he seemed to put more of the, I guess, responsibility or driving force behind the CIA, or he ascribes that to the CIA more than maybe this journal story does, but the sort of bones of it seem really similar.
What Hirsch gets right is the level of CIA involvement. But if this Wall Street Journal piece is to be believed, it's not that the CIA gave its tacit green light or approval to the operation, it's that it found out via Dutch intelligence about this operation. They forced or pressured Zelensky to call it off.
We know that money is fungible, and we know that the CIA had some awareness, though tried to, it sounds like based on this reporting, was not pleased with the plan. So that's interesting too, because we know that the Ukrainian military can't prosecute this war without funding from NATO allies, without a lot of funding from the United States, but even significant sacrifice and funding from countries like Poland, et cetera. So I guess it's almost, to me, not entirely mutually exclusive with some of the points about U.S. involvement, or not even, it would be wrong to say U.S., more NATO involvement, because Ukraine couldn't have funded all of this, likely. I mean, $300,000, sure, but they're in the middle of a war. They're spending money that is mostly coming from other countries at this point.
And it's not to suggest that this was some kind of rinky-dink operation. In fact, according to that Wall Street Journal report, it wasn't just Ukrainian state-backed, but they actually got in a lot of private business. They called it a private-public partnership to sustain and financially support this operation. But one of the big giveaways about the boat that was setting sail from the Danish port was that it had a small Ukrainian flag, which was sort of beggars belief as far as detective stories go. But to me, there are two big takeaways from this. One, real egg on the face for Germany, which for the past 2.5 years has been sending tens of billions of euros and huge amounts of military machinery to Ukraine, only for that country to respond, if it was Ukraine, that with one of the worst acts of industrial terrorism, essentially kneecapping Germany's energy policy. And quickly after that explosion occurred, you have Germany, France, other European countries nationalizing their energy companies, prices soaring. There was a huge economic fallout. But then on a more human level, I think what this goes to show is just how powerful people's priors are when it comes to these kind of issues. It's not just cultural issues, but it's foreign policy as well. And it just showed how quickly the groupthink cemented in these two positions. Was it America? Was it Russia? Could have been Ukraine. But the idea that it might have been a bit of everything, it just seemed to be completely alien to what a lot of these people seem to believe.
That's an excellent point, because I'm remembering and just sort of trying to put myself in my own shoes back in the swirl of this particular news cycle. And then when Hirsch's story came out too, I mean, it was so immediate and so confident from, of course, this chorus of people in legacy media, but then obviously there was a smaller chorus of equally confident and equally rapid sort of reacting people who said, obviously this was the CIA, obviously this was the United States. And now it does appear that the United States had some knowledge of it, and what the United States actually tried to do here is, I think, probably still going to be an open question that's left for plenty of debate. Also, James, my final thought on this is, hell of a Guy Ritchie movie. Like this needs to be a Guy Ritchie movie. It sounds like Guy Ritchie orchestrated it.
They used military dolphins in this operation. If that's true, then they can't not make this film.
Military dolphins?
Yes. And I went on a bit of a rabbit hole or a dolphin hole in the last hour, finding exactly how this operation used such animals.
You could have just said
that's a story for another day.
You could have said you went on a deep dive, but you said you went on a dolphin hole.
Sorry, it's a terrible choice of words.
James Billow, Unheard Newsroom editor, thank you for this deep dive. I found it very helpful.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, if you liked this clip, make sure to subscribe to the channel, the Undercurrents channel, that is. And for premium content, go over to undercurrents.tv. Feel free to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts as well. It helps a lot.